Good evening. First off, I'd like to ask, you guys know video games? Rhetorical question. Of course you guys know video games. They're fun sources of media that we often play on our television or our computers or on our phones on a daily basis these days. Each one with their own little themes and quirks, like say, violence. Now, as for me, most of the games I play are admittedly pretty violent. I've been playing violent video games since I was about 7 years old, honestly. One of my favorite franchises, actually, is this right here, Assassin's Creed. I mostly like it not just for the violence, but also for the historical education into it. But that's not the main reason why I'm discussing it. The main reason why I'm discussing it is because over the years I've played violent video games to an extent. My mom and dad, grandmother, they take me to GameStop, buy games rated T or mature, or at least until I was at least 17 years old, so I can buy games myself. I do that now, actually, and they let me just left me to my own devices, literally. And I honestly turned out fine. I mean, I don't have frequent thoughts of bashing in someone's face, and I don't have frequent thoughts of shooting up my school. I don't have thoughts of bullying other people or committing crimes like other people do. Most of my friends that play video games like me don't commit crimes on a regular. Unlike what a lot of politicians or other grown-ups are saying, video games are not the major direct cause for school violence especially among our youth. No, it's plenty of other factors that go into it. But people still claim that video games are detrimental to the younger people, to the younger kids of especially under the age of 13. Now, I can admit, video games are a little bit of a cause of concern if they're played too much, especially among our youth. According to kidshealth.org, which was reviewed by an MD named Larissa Hirsch, I believe that's how it's pronounced, video games can be unhealthy to an extent. Like, although they say it increases reflexes and motor functions, it's very much not a physical activity that you should invest all your time in because the only real movement that you're doing is with your hands. Now, you're obviously going to gain weight, you're going to be unfit, so express some moderation in regards to video games, especially among our youth. Parents should honestly be doing that too for your kids that don't know any better. Establish some rules, take a weight system for a bit, make them go outside like my mom and dad did. They do it all the time. Like I would try to stay inside, play some video games like all day long. They literally say they would smash my game system if I did not get my butt outside. But besides that, video games aren't that bad. But no, again, a lot of people say they cause violence. And I disagree with that extremely. And am I a little biased? Sure. But I do have other sources to back me up on this. For example, from according to videogames.procon.org, which goes over a lot of lists between the pros and cons toward the argument of if video games cause violence. Now, again, there's a lot of lists, and especially in the con side, disputing that argument. So I couldn't find time to record them all, especially in a 7 to 10 minute video. But I will share two of them that should stand out. Number one, video games. Video game sales specifically have increased over 204% between the year 1994 and 2014, the same time when crimes of violence decreased by 37% and murders specifically committed by juveniles dropped by 76%. That is weird, right? I mean, if video games are being bought more often, shouldn't that be causing more violence like all the other people are saying too? Well, it didn't, especially during that time period. Violence dropped while video game sales were skyrocketing. That's a very big contradiction to that argument. A very big contradiction to how, according to the New York Times, Donald Trump claimed we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. By that logic, we should ban pretty much all forms of media, right? Like ban every single television, almost every single television show that shows violence, ban every single kind of music that has mentions of violence, ban every kind of movie that shows violence. By that logic, video games isn't the only contributor to that fact to the issue of school violence. It's not. It's not There's no point in singling only one source of media when you have plenty of other examples that have just as much violence, maybe even more. Another little tidbit from videogames.procon.org is that back in 2011 there was a little court issue where California tried to ban the sale of video games. And Supreme Court ruled against that during the case of Brown versus the Entertainment Merchants Association that violent games do not cause youth to act aggressively. The Supreme Court said that themselves, 2011. I have the source. Look it up if you don't believe me. Now, with that in mind, you'd think that'd be enough to dissuade people from thinking that video games do not cause violence, right? No, they don't think that at all. They think that school shootings that have been growing over the years are still majorly caused by the very graphic games that have been distributed to teenagers. And that's also not true. There are a load of other reasons why that studies on why video games cause violence tend to ignore. They ignore things like family, the school environment, the location they're in, maybe their own background, their mental, psychological status, their health. They ignore all of that in favor of just focusing directly on video games. Crisis Consultant Group.com actually touches this by naming at least naming actually four exactly different reasons why school violence is a thing. Number one, lack of effective disciplinary symptoms. What does that mean? Well, most of the disciplinary system in school, admittedly, is focused on stopping an issue as it arises. Now, granted, there are schools that actually have been taking prevention systems and lessons in discouraging violence among students, encouraging more peaceful methods like going to a teacher or simply talking things out. Yeah, that's true. But there are also a lot of schools that don't do this. It's focused on uh, solving the problem after it happens rather than preventing the problem from happening in the first place. That's a problem. Another issue would mention, which contributes to school violence, a lack of community or support system amongst teachers, counselors, and parents. Students need a support system, especially if they're going through some hard times, like say moving to a different area, or if they're being bullied, or if they're going through some maybe abuse at home or out in an outside area. They need to have that level of trust and communication with school faculty and their own family. But if the family is the problem, and definitely for the faculty too, but if the faculty is a problem itself, then that's a whole issue that needs to be solved too. Another issue is the disconnect between students. Students should be encouraged to work together, honestly. They should be encouraged to work with the school to prevent violence among each other. And not to mention where I said the prevention of violence, those lessons and guidelines, those anti-bullying videos and methods that they teach the kids, it shouldn't just be targeted for the victims. They should be also targeted toward the bullies themselves. And I don't mean just like casting them in a negative light or saying don't do it. I mean, actually reach those kids that feel the need to express their emotions through violence for whatever reason, because there are a lot of bullies out there that are being abused themselves. So maybe encourage them to speak out their issues in a more productive and less unhealthy way. And finally, the disconnect between students and teachers. Like I mentioned, school faculty should have support with the teacher. The school faculty should be supporting the students in their school because if they don't, how are they going to prevent violence? Like I said, they need to reach out to their schools' support systems or counselors so we can all work together to create a less violent environment for our youth. It's not banning video games that need to be done. Like I said, that can be done in moderation. The parents themselves should be discouraging their kids from wanting these kinds of games. Let them get these games when they're older and more mentally capable of processing all the content in them. If they buy the games for their kids, that's on them. You can't just blame the games though, because there's a whole bunch of other factors that people tend to ignore. And we can't let that double standard take away one of our sources of entertainment. Like to me, that seems like a violation of our First Amendment of free speech. It's people creating content, expressing their own views and ideas through a different medium, and people are trying to ban that. That's not okay. And together, we can create an environment that's less violent without sacrificing the things we love. Thank you for your time.